Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. My name's Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com, and Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners. And today my guest is Jonathan DeYoe, and Jonathan has led an independent financial planning firm since 2002. He and the Mindful Money team work one-on-one with 300 families and foundations. The Mindful Money team offers simple steps to financial success and tools to mindfully overcome emotional and cognitive biases related to money. And Jonathan's going to be talking about some personal finance things and some financial illusions that people have around money.
Talking with the Experts.
Welcome, Jonathan, and thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, Rose, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about what your business does and how it can help others.
Well, the story sort of begins a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Before I was in finance, I was a seminarian, meaning I was going to be a minister or a pastor. And I stopped that path and decided to study comparative religion. And I stopped that path and decided I would go deep into Buddhist studies. And then I stopped that path and decided I would practice Buddhism instead of study Buddhism. And so I did all of that before I started my financial planning career. And in the first 5 years of my financial planning career, what I saw was people very emotional about money. It's about pace, it's about quick decisions, it's about trading, it's about purchasing, it's acquiring. And what I noticed, the difference between that and the studies that I had done, psychology and the sort of quasi-religious studies that I had done, was, we talked a lot in school about what makes people happy. And then in financial services, I wasn't at all focused on what made people happy. I was on, trading and money and good investment decisions and those kinds of things. And those two things didn't get along. And so when I started my company, I said, okay, what's a better way to do this? How do we actually bring better outcomes to people's lives? And then the focus came to, well, we do more planning and we do more education. And so that's kind of what we're all about today, is that financial planning, financial education, and then we bring in my whole background with mindfulness and meditation as a way to stay on plan.
Cool. I know that with the current situation, in the past 12 months has been, quite challenging for a lot of people financially. So how can they better, their financial position, considering, people have lost their jobs and can't go to school, can't go to work?
So the question you ask is the one that I think every government on earth is trying to figure out, and we're all trying to figure out. I don't know that I have the answer to how do we help people who have lost their jobs. I mean, I think this is why we have a federal purse. This is why we have the federal benefits that we have. And this is why it's so important. And I knew we weren't going to get into this, but this is why it's so important that tomorrow is happening, that we have a changing of the guard in the US federal government, at least, because there are people that are suffering, and the only real solution for someone that's lost their job or can't go to work or they can't go to work because their kids are at home working or doing their homework or whatever, that requires financial support from a government. When the government says, hey, you can't work, or your boss can't keep the company going or whatever, then the federal government has to step in and say, okay, we're going to actually make sure your family can eat, your loans can get paid, your bills can get paid, so that when it comes back around, which it always does, it was never a question whether or not we were going to survive the pandemic. It was always a question about what the financial status would be when we get there. But if they're going to shut us down, they have to also give us respite, some kind of support. And frankly, it's really hard to target that support where it's needed most. So earlier in 2020, in the US specifically, they made this huge CARES Act, and it was an enormous amount of money, and it did an enormous amount of good, but it wasn't targeted specifically to the places that needed it the most. Mm-hmm. And so what we had a whole bunch of people that took home more money than they needed, and a whole bunch of people who didn't have enough money. And we did it again at the end of December, and we're going to do it again here. Come up, when Biden's elected, he's already elected. When Biden is sworn in, and we have the next round of support that comes out of the federal government, it looks like we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to spend a whole bunch of money, which means a lot of people are going to end up with more than they need, and a lot of other people are going to end up with not enough. And so we have a targeting issue. But really, the thing we have to do to support those people is to spend more money federally. That's the only solution I have. That's rarely what I do much of. I'm coaching people that have money. How do we not panic? How do we stay on plan? How do we, those aren't the people I have to worry the most about right now.
We're with the same here. Our money's not been targeted sufficiently either, or appropriately. People, they're getting more than they need, and now that it's been cut back and they've been used to having all that spending, they're going to be quite challenged in the future. So and the people that really needed it didn't get it. So I mean, governments can only do the best they can, but it is what it is, I guess.
Yep, well said.
So why is money such an enormous stress and an anxiety point to people?
It's a great question. I think a lot about it. First, I think that there's, at least in the U.S., there is no formal financial education. We're all basically flying by the seat of our pants when it comes to personal finances. There are lots of blogs. You can get 1-hour sessions at your company's 401k, but generally, if you don't seek it out, there is no education about money. And I think this is largely cultural. We've financialized everything in the United States specifically, including our idea of success. The entire middle section of the book that I wrote, Mindful Money, is devoted to remembering where true wealth comes from. Things like staying healthy, learning new things, maintaining close familial and friendship relationships, finding ways to give back to the world, staying accountable to your own desires. These are the things that create happiness. But we have so much financialized success that we're all stressed out about having a better job and a better car and a bigger house and a better vacations. And we're all stressed out about getting the best pictures up on social media. One of the more sort of important implications of the planning process is you actually think about what really matters to you. And you start laying out the groundwork for your life based on what really matters to you, not based on the next shiny thing.
Yeah. So why and how do you bring mindfulness together?
Money and mindfulness? It's a good question. Yeah. So do you meditate? I'm just curious.
I try to, but not as often as I should.
Fair enough. Many people say they same kind of response. So mindfulness defined is just a non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. It is the recognition of reality before we apply our narratives. And we have a lot of narratives. So many, many, many years ago, 20, 30 years ago, economics, the practice of economics, the thing that underlies our investment world, believed that men and women were rational animals. They sort of projected this idea that what we do is we gather all this important information and we make very rational decisions for our future. But then about 15 or so years ago, they started doing different research, and Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize, actually wrote a piece on behavioral finance. He's a psychologist that actually won the Nobel Prize in economics for this whole new realm of behavioral finance. And so today, no one really believes that we're rational animals, but that doesn't solve the problem of we have these biases. What can we do about them? And Buddhist monks for thousands of years have been, and this is, you can look at a what's it called, EKG of their brains when they're sitting and when they're in meditation, and you can see that they are able to manage their emotions better. And this is what the research tells us. The more modern psychology research tells us about mindfulness, about meditation, is it slowly decreases the size of our amygdala, and it literally increases the size of our frontal cortex. What that means is we're less reactive and we're more thoughtful. So in a way, mindfulness gives us a doorway to rationality when rationality is so difficult to grasp in that emotional moment. That's a long-winded answer to how money and mindfulness go together. Money causes fear.
Yeah.
Mindfulness overcomes fear.
Okay, yeah, it's a great concept. Because money does cause fear, and people have lots of issues around money. So about saving it, about spending it, not having enough. And you're right about success. Up until recently, success was measured by how much money you had, what kind of car you had, what kind of house you had. Your 2.3 children and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's getting better over time. People are starting to work out that success isn't measured by those things any longer. It's you as a person, I think, is and how you treat others and treat yourself, I think, is the measure of success. That's in my book anyway.
I think that I hope that you're right. I think that there's always a number of people that will measure your success by how you treat others and who you are in the world. And there's always a number of people that will race to the top of the biggest bank account and the most stocks and the fastest car. And I think that there's those two groups compete pretty regularly. And I think you're right, though. I think that the modern day, the millennial, the Gen Z, they're not as worried about making more money. And they're more worried about live-work balance and doing something that really pulls at my heart and really engages who I am as a person. And they're really worried about their work in community with others. And that's one of the reasons we see the groundswell in the US for things like Black Lives Matter, for things like, in Georgia, for the first time ever, we have 2 Democratic senators, which is incredible. That's incredible. That's in Georgia. That's in the deep South, which is very cool to see.
Good. Okay, you talk a lot about education and planning. So that's the first priority. What does that mean in the context of wealth management?
So, what does education and planning mean in the context of
a wealth management firm? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the question we ask, and this is a question we should all ask, is what are the levers that an advisor can pull that can actually provide better outcomes for a client? And if we ask that question honestly, many advisors, and I think there's still probably more than 50% of advisors, would say we provide better investment outcomes. But there's a ton of research on this, and the research says, no, you don't. You can't. No one can forecast the future. You can't predict. We should all stop trying to predict. So rather than that, what can we do? And I think that there's a couple things that are really, really important. The first one is education. If we can get clients to focus on financial history instead of a financial headline, and if we can get them to focus on the basics, like what is inflation, how does compound interest combat that inflation? It used to be like when my parents retired, they lived for 4 or 5 years and then they died. When my parents retired, they probably have 15, 20 years before they die. When I retire, it's going to be like 30, 35, 40 years that I will be retired. So the risk of losing your money is no longer the real risk. The real risk is inflation and not keeping up with the rising cost of living, because you're living 30, 40 years in retirement. So the first part of education, as it applies to planning, is understanding what the real risk is. And then planning is actually making the trade-offs. Okay, if inflation is the real risk, then if I don't have exposure to those things that are scary, the things that zig and zag, the stocks, then I'm not going to have enough money to live the rest of my life without relying on some other source, right? So the trade-offs are understanding how these things work in a lifetime context, not just 5 years, but a 40-year retirement. And that's, making the right trade-offs, saving enough, investing the right way. These are the levers we can pull, but I can't pull those levers unless clients are educated first. So that's why we think that education and planning are the most important things we can do.
Yeah, I agree with that. So what are your thoughts about the difference between money or wealth as mindful money or wealth?
What is mindful wealth? So there's 2 or 3 things that I think of when I think of mindful wealth. The first really important thing is the source of mindful wealth. Now, I don't know if you coach businesses or what the role is outside of this podcast, but I work with a lot of businesses. I work with a lot of academics. I work with a lot of artists. And there's people that have a sense or have a feeling about money. And we have a judgment about people that have money. And I think that largely that judgment has been earned by people with money who are not good with it, who don't do good things with it, who are more interested in walling themselves off from the world than engaging the world and helping out. So the source of that wealth, the people that have that wealth show up in a certain way if they're mindful. It's not, for lack of a better word, it's not rapacious how they get their money. They're not taking advantage of other people to get their money. And then once they have their money, they're investing it in a way that is more mindful of our codependence, our what the Buddhists would call our dependent co-origination, the fact that we're all dependent upon each other. And so that we're not going to do things like, drill, 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 drill. And we're not going to do things like, throw more garbage away and let it get into the ocean. And we're not going to treat people badly. And we're not going to, so there's ways you show up when you have money that's good for the environment, it's good for the people, it's good for you. It shows up in your investments, you invest differently, you engage your communities differently. So I think mindfulness doesn't wall itself off. Mindful money doesn't wall itself off, doesn't source itself in other people's pain, and doesn't invest in a way that hurts the environment and hurts the communities.
Oh, absolutely. You're a man of my own heart. Really, you are. I think that if you chuck your money around and it's not done, as you say, in a mindful way, it is harmful to the environment. It's harmful to people. I mean, it doesn't cost a lot to give someone a warm blanket or something to eat or whatever the case may be. It's not going to break your bank. It's to someone who has money, it's petty cash really. And I don't think a lot of people with money actually think of it in that way.
I think there's some bad actors that give people with money a really bad, and so I think that the image is deserved of people with money, and the things we don't hear about are a lot of people with money that do all the things that we just talked about. I mean, they don't make the headlines. The person that's handing out the blanket, we don't know that person is doing it, right? And there's people do that every day. We just don't hear the stories, and that's. I hesitate to say all wealth is bad. I just know that there's good wealth out there.
Yeah, I'm sure there is, but you're right. Yeah, we don't hear about the good stuff. We just hear about the naughty people,
of which there are many.
Yes. So I guess culturally speaking, wealth, as we know the word, is having a really bad moment. So how should we think about wealth creation in the context of our social fabric in the future?
So this is the question I spend probably more time with than most other questions, and I think that we kind of covered it a second ago. The reality is, this is just experience, and my clients, the people I work with. Generally, wealth doesn't, unless it's inherited. Wealth doesn't come from anywhere. You have to either invent something or produce. And I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, and this is what and they are raised in a different environment than I was raised in. When I was growing up, my dad lost his job, lost his business when I was 3, and no one in my family had a decent job until I was 15. So between the ages of 3 and 15, we didn't really have anything. Like, we had very little. We lived on government support a lot. So there's a lot of support there. My kids are growing up just totally blessed. I'm not saying the pandemic hasn't touched them. I'm just saying they have great summer camps, they got great tutors, they got great vacations, they live in a great house, we drive nice cars. So we do a lot of things. But the problem with that is, the lesson that I learned growing up was I had to work hard to become, I had to work hard to have, I had to work hard. They're learning a different lesson. And that's a challenge. And I worry about that. Wealth comes from innovation and productivity. And whether you're the innovator or the producer, or you're investing in someone who innovates and produces, that's where wealth comes from. And if it's done in a way that benefits the world, and I'll use, a great example is Steve Jobs, who is no longer with us, right? But he developed something he and Apple, with brilliant engineers, many, developed something that changed all of our lives for the better. Like I don't have to have a camera. I don't have to have a level. There's so many tools that are now in that phone, recording, music, phone, communications, video. I can do anything with this thing, right? It's amazing. The tool is amazing. And so, yeah, the Jobs family and Apple employees are all incredibly wealthy, but they did it producing something that changed the world for the better, an amazing tool, right? So a lot of wealth comes from that. There's also wealth that's created, and you read about them when there's like what do you call it, a pyramid scheme, or you people that are sending you emails and hacking your system so that they can get a hold of your bank statement, so they can steal your identity. So there's wealth can be stolen, it can be created in nefarious ways. It can also be created in good ways, and so wealth is having a bad moment. I would say that it kind of deserves that moment. I'm among the 1% in the United States, and I'm for higher taxes on my income. So I think that it's time for us to do that, especially now coming out of a pandemic. I don't want to see a whole lot of debt. I don't want to see any tax reductions. I want to see tax increases, and people like me should be there to pay more for people that need it more. And now that I say that, I know that my dad is, if he's listening, if he hears this, he'll be like, oh, because he was, he's a red state guy, and he's worried about inflation and worried about these other things that were really important to him and his generation. They're less important to me and my generation. They may be important again at some point, but right now we should be worrying about people and fairness.
Yeah. I'm thinking, I'm guessing that you and I are pretty much the same generation, and how, we brought up our kids. I mean, I was brought up the same, you work hard. I mean, I come from a middle class family, but when we moved to Australia, when I was a child, you had to work hard to get what you wanted. And, I was always brought up like that. And I brought my children up the same, that, you just don't get stuff handed to you on a plate, because, it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel rewarding. It doesn't feel, I don't know, to me, it just doesn't sit well if you're just given it and haven't earned it.
This kills me, because I think you retained that lesson. I came out with a different desire for my kids. Like I was like, I had nothing. It was really rough. And so I wanted to make sure that they had more. And so there's conversations I have with my wife. My wife was raised with more. And so she catches me doing this sometimes. And I really appreciate it when she catches me doing it. But I go, yeah, no, I think we should take that vacation. I think we should spend that money. I think we should do that. And she's always saying, well, what message are we giving the kids if we do this? But for me, it's like, I really want to provide for them and give them a great experience that I never had.
Yeah, I was the same with mine. I wanted to give them more because, we didn't have a lot when we came to Australia. I mean, because I come from Canada, we were middle class there, but when we came here, we didn't have a lot. And I grew up with not a lot. And I wanted to provide for my children, a lot. But I taught them that you have to work hard to earn, whatever you have to have. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it was the right way or the wrong way, but, they're responsible with their money now, where I wasn't, and I'm still not totally responsible with mine. So, what's the best way to go about it?
We all have to answer the question internally and hope we do it right, and hope that hope the kids take whatever lesson is we're teaching. It's absolutely. So for small businesses, what are the best, what would be your, I guess, top 3 tips for, growing their wealth and, getting past this horrible pandemic at the moment? So just a little brief story about 2020. Okay. So going into 2020, you could read all kinds of people talking about what 2020 was going to be like. We're talking December of 2019. Everyone was talking about what 2020 was going to be like. And by mid-February, all of those guesses were off the table. And the whole new set of guesses came, right? And the guesses that came were like sort of Armageddon guesses, like how many people are going to die, how many people are going to get sick, economies were not going to recover. So the headlines in February and March were the total opposite of the December headlines. And I say this because today markets are up. I think the U.S. market is up 70% from its low. Now, if you would have asked any one of those predictors, prognosticators in March where the market would be, and you could tell them this is how many people are going to get sick, and you say this is, if you had complete knowledge, would you ever have guessed that the market would be up 70% from that point? And none of them would have guessed it. So here's the first thing: stop predicting. It doesn't work. It's never worked. There's all kinds of academic research on the fact that it doesn't work. Stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it. And that's where the entire financial services industry, they bank on your need for their predictions. So stop predicting, stop expecting somebody else to predict. Second, start planning. Think not the next 2 years, not the next 12 months, think 10 years, and then back into that. So if my goal is 10 years to be there, then about 5 years from now, I should be about halfway there. Then about 1 year from now, I should be about 10% of the way there. And that's where my goals are, right? That's think long-term and put the practices in place that will get you to those goals long-term, but get those short-term things along the way, right? And then the third thing is, and this maybe is obvious, but stay mindful. Stay mindful of your plan. Stay mindful of your own limitations to know things. Like you can't know some things. That's okay. Believe in the future, trust the future. It will be okay. It always comes around. We take 2 steps forward and we take 1 step back, and then we take 2 steps forward. And that's always going to be the way it is. And if you have trouble, read Charlie Munger. I mean, Charlie Munger is, he's the guy that talks about all the philosophy, and I love everything he writes. He's fantastic. But he's the guy that actually, says don't predict, always plan, short steps, very simple stuff. And I would just follow those kinds of basic philosophies. Stop predicting, start planning, stay mindful.
Terrific. And tell me a little bit about your book.
Yeah. So Mindful Money, simple practice for reaching your financial goals and increasing your happiness dividend. There's 3 parts to the book. The first third of the book is dedicated to unlearning things that we learn incorrectly. So this is the illusions. The middle third of the book is dedicated to basically the years and years and years of philosophy and religious studies and comparative religion that talk about what is it that makes a life worth living. It's those relationships, meaning, accountability, generosity, optimism, gratitude, these kinds of things. And that creates the foundation of the life well lived. And then the third part of the book is, now that you have the foundation, now that you understand what you're not supposed to do, build a financial plan. And this gives you a step-by-step. My book gives you step-by-step. At the end of the book, you have a financial plan written for yourself. And that way you don't need an advisor. You don't have to pay anyone a lot of money. You just go through the exercises in the book and you'll have the plan. You'll understand a lot of this stuff.
I have to buy it.
You haven't? What?
So where can they find the book?
My preference would be go to a local bookstore, but since most things are closed, then yeah, Amazon is probably the best source.
Righto. And website?
Mindful.money. There's no .com, it's just mindful.money. And there you can find all of our social media. You can find all of our services, all of our courses, all that stuff is up there.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's taught me to be a bit more mindful with my money. I have mindful money thoughts.
Good luck. I hope you can be. And thanks for having me, Rose.
All right.
Talking with the experts.